new Parsha, new Sefer Shemot. Yitzi, this week we discussed what is the staff about, the Mateh of Moshe, because there's a very interesting Pasuk where HaKadosh Baruch Hu turns to Moshe and says to him, what's this in your hand? And Moshe says, a staff, a Mateh. And like we mentioned, when you have such a simple seeming Pasuk, there are some very, very deep levels behind it.
And as we know, this staff doesn't end here. This staff goes with us through Mitzrayim, goes with us through the desert, and actually the end of Moshe's life ends with Moshe using that staff in the wrong way. So what's the story of this staff? Why is it so important? Why does it represent so much?
Exactly. It represents so much that it represents one of the most deepest questions we have to ask ourselves. Also, the concept of a staff in Hebrew, a mateh, has so many deep levels to it in Hebrew, in the Hebrew language, so many different meanings that we go through in order to explain what this pasuk is about. It really is a very, very deep pasuk. Hope you enjoy it. Take a look. New Sefer Shemot, and just before we dive into this week's talk, I just want to take a moment and thank everyone who's been watching these videos every single week for the past 2.5 years, and of course, all our subscribers who've subscribed to the channel, everyone who comments every week, and all the different replies and feedback that we get. We highly enjoy it, we highly appreciate it, and keep them coming, keep these comments and feedback coming, and help us grow the channel and spread the Torah around. Now, this week, what I want to talk about is, in the beginning of the Parsha, we of course find the story of Moshe Rabbeinu going to Midian, and then in the Midian, the burning bush that we discussed last year, and over there's a whole backwards and forwards between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Moshe. And within that backwards and forwards between Hashem and Moshe, there's a very interesting pasuk, to say the least. At some point, HaKadosh Baruch Hu asks Moshe, what is that in your hand? And Moshe replies, it's a staff, a mateh. And you see that pasuk, you really have to ask, what is this pasuk doing there? Why does HaKadosh Baruch Hu ask Moshe, what is that in your hand? And Moshe just replies so simply, a staff, a mateh. Obviously, every time you see such a pasuk, you know that there's something way deeper behind this pasuk. Just like where HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks for Adam and he says, where are you? Or just like when HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks for Hevel and he asks Kayin, where's your brother? You know there's a lot more to that pasuk than what you see with your eye in the pasuk itself. So what is HaKadosh Baruch Hu asking Moshe over there about his mateh? What is Moshe answering? And of course, what is so important about this staff, about this mateh? What is this mateh about? Because we will see this mateh throughout all the years in the desert. This mateh will be right there next to Moshe in many, many different situations. So what is this mateh about? What is this pasuk about? What is going on over here?
That's a great question. As you're saying, usually when we see a question, when God is asking a question, which he can obviously answer himself, he's expecting from Moshe to answer something. As you said, right? Adam Arishon, Ayeka, we see this as like the question to humanity. Where are you? So what is in your hand? That should be another question to humanity. What is this question? Why is it so important? Why is it so dramatic? And Moshe's answer doesn't seem very dramatic. Oh, it's a stick, right? So what's really going on here? And actually, this reminds me of something that always bothered me in Seder night. When we read the Psukim and we explain the different Psukim in the Haggadah, one of them, we go through these words that describe, the miracles that Hashem did. Uvemora gadol, uveotot, uvemoftim, talking about God's strong hand and the miracles he did in Egypt. And then when the Haggadah comes to explain this, it says, moftim, what's moftim? It's the blood, which, okay, that's one of the miracles. Maybe it's the first one, so maybe that's why that's mentioned. But when it talks about the otot, it says, what's the otot? The mateh. The staff. Really? The staff is what we use to do the otot, maybe. It was used to do some of these miracles, but the otot is the staff. It's interesting because the Pasuk actually brought there to prove it is that you should take this staff and with it you should do the otot, which means the staff is not the otot. Then how is that proof that otot is the staff? So what's really going on here? Why is this staff so important to become like the symbol of Moshe Rabbeinu? What is it really about? But I think key to understanding it is actually here, the first place it shows up. Because as we said, Hashem isn't just asking him, what's in your hand? Oh, a staff. What type of conversation is that? Mateh obviously means more than just a staff. And by the way, the word in itself is very interesting because we use that same word when we talk about tribes. They're shevet, which by the way, also means a staff, a stick. And mateh, we sometimes refer to the tribes as mateh, sometimes as shevet. Both of them are staff. What does staff actually mean in Hebrew? Why is this so important? And if we look through Tanakh and try to understand the word, I think we'll see two sides to the mateh. On the one hand, it's something that you lean on, right? It's your mish'en. mishenet. It's something you lean on. It gives you the stability. It shows up in Tanakh. Eshbo mateh lachmam. When there's hunger and you lose the bread, it's called the mateh lechem, the staff of bread. The bread that you depend on, that gives you the stability in life. When that's lost, you've lost your staff. You've lost that stability in life. But there's also another aspect. Many times we see the staff in context of ruling others, of controlling others, many times in a negative way. It's used to hit, it's used to bring down. Actually, the word mateh is the same word as mata, as downward. It's the way that someone who's on top, who's controlling others, brings other people down, controls other people, controls the thing around you. So in a certain sense, maybe that stability for that type of person is his ability to bring down everyone else. Paro right now has his staff, right? He's controlling all of Am Yisrael. He's bringing everyone down and he's controlling everyone with his stick. And Hashem turns to Moshe and says, what's in your hand? And he says, a staff. A staff in the sense, this is something I lean on. This is something which gives me my stability. And Hashem turns to him and says, really? Throw it down for a minute. What happens? It turns into a snake. And this is usually what we remember from the story, but there's another part of the story. Moshe runs away from it. And only then Hashem tells him, pick it up and it'll be a staff back in your hand again. What is this about? That same staff that you were leaning on, that was your stability, suddenly was a snake that you were escaping. That stability you saw in life is nothing. It's an illusion. You think that's a staff. What's in your hand, the staff? No, it's not. But the next step is, what does Hashem tell him? So that's what's in your hand. What about your hand itself? Now take your hand and your hand will suddenly turn with tzarat. It'll lose its life. So everything you see, everything you depend on, whether it's the things, the external things with which you control the world around you, or whether it's you yourself, all of that is all an illusion. All of that is really in my hand. That staff with which you think you're leaning on is all an illusion. The only staff that actually exists in the world is, as we see it called later, Mateh Elohim. God is that mishenet. God is that staff. Your ability to act in this world and change things in this world is not because you have a stick and you beat everyone around and that's how you get them to do things. It's because God gives you that ability. And this is going to be the battle all the time. And I think that's exactly what's happening here in the Haggadah when it talks about the mateh as being the otot. What is an otot? Otot isn't a miracle. Otot means a sign. We use the word oti beini uvenechem when we talk about Shabbos. We talk about the tefillin as being an ot. Ot is a symbol. It's a sign. If we look in the Psukim, we'll see that usually the concept of otot show up around Am Yisrael. Also, the story here with the staff, this isn't the story of the staff which is later done by Aaron's staff with Paro. This staff was a sign for Am Yisrael. Am Yisrael didn't need miracles, didn't need, makot, didn't need these punishments. They needed a sign. They needed to look at the world in a new way. The mateh represents the sign. The Egyptians needed maybe punishments, needed things to be turned around, needed their reality to be ripped apart, both as a punishment and both so they would finally recognize and open up and let Am Yisrael out. Am Yisrael didn't need that. They needed an ot. And the mateh represents the ot, because the mateh represents that what you lean on in this world, even though you see all this power around you of Egypt and the sticks that they use with them, they control you. Even though you see all of that, it's all a bluff. This mateh of Moshe Rabbeinu is gonna be ot, is gonna be the sign with which you will recognize that the only thing in the world that you can rely on and should rely on is HaKadosh Baruch. So maybe that's what this big question to Moshe is. What's in your hand? And he says the staff. That's the question that we always should be asking. Just like the ayeka, which is the constant question of where are you? The second question is, what are you relying on? What's your stability in this world? What's in your hand? Is it you? Is it your power? Or is it Mateh Elohim? I think that's what's going on here. And this explains the whole story with the Mateh going forward.
Exactly. Very beautiful what you're saying, because like we said, this Pasuk of Maze Beyadcha Mateh, this Pasuk has so much essence behind it, such a big, deep meaning behind it. We always focus, like you were saying, on the ayeka. Where are you, mankind? What is the purpose of mankind in this world? But this Pasuk right over here, just before Yetziat Mitzrayim, has an incredible meaning and purpose for Am Yisrael, for who we are as a nation, and the message that we bring into this world, not from Moshe, from Avraham Avinu. The message that not only Moshe is about to teach Am Yisrael and teach Paro and teach everyone over there, but the message actually that Yosef taught right before him. Because we've discussed Yosef's essence and who Yosef was many times in our talks, and one of the great ideas that Yosef represented in this this world was this concept that everything he does is because of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The huge, deep bitachon he had in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and in everything he did, even though Yosef is considered this top CEO, this top leader of the world, someone who would definitely be invited to Davos every year to decide things for the world and all the politicians around, even though there was no one like him in all of Egypt because Paro looked for one and couldn't find one, and he made Yosef in charge. With all that, he still always said, without HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm nothing. Everything I do is thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Like Rashi emphasized, like the Midrash says, Shem Shamaim Shagur B'fiv. He always had Hashem's name in his words, and everything he did, he always knew that with everything that he does, it's all thanks to Hashem. It's all because HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives him the ability, gives them the power to do those things. And then we have Yosef, who taught this to Mitzrayim. However, what happens in the beginning of the Parsha? In the beginning of the Parsha, Vayakom melech chadash asher lo yada et Yosef. We have a new king who disagrees with this concept, who disagrees with this idea. He doesn't like this concept of understanding that everything you do is because of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He wants to show the whole world that he is the God, that everything he does is because what he wants to do, and he gives himself his own power, and the power is his. And what he does with his hands, the hands that represent the doing, the actions in this world, is because of him, is because of what he wants. Or as we say, the thought that my strength and my own power is what gives me the success in this world. That's Paro. That's what Paro was driving into Mitzrayim, and that's why he forgot Yosef. So then comes around Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe, who looks at this staff and says, it's a simple staff, like you were saying. It's something I lean on, because Baruch Hu teaches him you can lean on it, but you can also run away from it. This staff can be there in order to give you stability, but not like you think that it's stable because you see with your eyes that you can lean on it, but because this is Matei Elokim, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants it to be stable, because everything you do in this world with your hands is part of your job, part of what you have to bring into this world and create into this world, but it's because HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given you that power, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to do that. This is what Hashem is telling Moshe over here. This is what Hashem is teaching Moshe, and very interestingly, later on in the Makot, we see how in the first three Makot, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe, tell Aharon to take a staff and rise it up, and then do the Makkah. We see it with Dam, we see it with Tzfardea, and we see it with Kinim. And Aaron does just that. He takes the staff and he raises it up. But by the later three Makot, by the 7th, 8th, and 9th Makot of Barad, Arbe, and Choshech, it's Moshe's turn to do the Makkah. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to him in Barad and in Arbe, raise your hand and do the Makkah. And Moshe doesn't raise his hand. He raises his mateh. He raises his staff. And that's how he does the Makkah, because Moshe shows that he understands exactly what's in his hand. It's not his hand. It's mateh Elokim. Like again, the Torah emphasizes over here, as Moshe goes down to Egypt, he takes with him also mateh Elokim, and then he goes down to Egypt, because in order to fight with Mitzrayim, to fight with Egypt, to fight with this concept of kochi ve'otzem yadi, my own strength and power, my own hands is what works in this world. In order to fight that, you have to understand shel mazeh beyadcha, what's in your hand, the mateh Elokim, what I have in my hand, what I depend on, like you were saying, what I lean on is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I don't lean on myself. I don't lean on my own hands. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe, Natei yadcha, but Moshe raises the staff because he fully understands that it's not his hands, it's not hayadayim shelo, it's the mateh, it's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants in this world. That's what gives him the power. This is the battle between Am Yisrael and Mitzrayim. As we said, if the question of Ayeka, where are you mankind, for Adam Arishon is the main question for humanity, this is the big learning and the big idea for Am Yisrael, because this is what we represent in the world, like we were saying with Yosef, with Moshe Rabbeinu, and throughout all the generations. On the one hand, we are here to create, we are here to bring good into the world, but we understand that this comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We understand that our power comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and everything we do is thanks to him and because of him, and this is what we bring into this world. And very interestingly, like we mentioned a year and a half ago in Parashat Korach, we talked about the staff of Aaron over there, and we were saying that the staff is meant for leaning on. Leaning in Hebrew is lismoch, which is also to trust, and lismoch is the same root, is the same shoresh as samchut, as authority. In order to have authority, you have to have people trust in you. You have to put your trust in the person that you want to be the leader, and this is what's going on over here. The trust that Moshe Rabbeinu gets from the Zkenim, from Am Yisrael, is this otot that Hashem is teaching him. This is what Moshe asked for. He says, how are they going to believe me? Why would they believe me? Hashem gives him these otot, these signs to show the Zkenim in order for them to trust him. Once he gets the trust, that's when he gets the authority. This is what this mater represents. This is the deep idea behind this very simple pasuk. Mazeh beyadcha vayomer mater. What's in your hands? I have HaKadosh Baruch Hu behind me. My hands, my my actions are all thanks to what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from me and gives me the power to do.
Beautiful, beautiful. And you know, the next time that we see the term Matea Elohim is not in Mitzrayim. It's later on when Am Yisrael fight their first war against Amalek. And Moshe tells Yoshua, you're going to go fight down there, but I'm going to go up to the mountain, Umatea Elohim Be'adi. And they're going to look up, and as we know, the Tzukim and the Midrash there describe how Moshe raises his hands and they win, and he drops his hands and they lose. And Chazal say, what does this mean? What, his hands cause the war to win or lose? And it's not. It's when they turn their hearts to God. And that's why he goes up with the Mateh Elohim, because Mateh Elohim represents what you lean on in this world. Your Mateh is not your ability to be stronger and beat your enemies stronger than they beat you. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's Mateh Elohim. And that's why when you're going to fight your first war, I'm going to be standing up there with Mateh Elohim. You'll remember the Mateh of Mitzrayim. You'll remember how they controlled you. And when you're going to fight the war, you're going to have Mateh Elohim in your mind. When you look up, when you look at it, that's when you're going to win the war.
Very good. And like you were saying, Moshe, it wasn't his hands, because his hands are the Mateh. This is exactly what we're saying here. His hands and his Mateh are the same thing. They are there in order for Am Yisrael to look up to Shamayim, to remind them that the strength comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But we're out of time, so we'll have to end here as usual. We'll just remind our viewers what we've discussed the past 2 years. So 1 year we discussed the whole idea behind the burning bush, like I mentioned. What's going on over there? We know that story since kindergarten, but there are very, very interesting thoughts behind that story that you definitely haven't thought about since kindergarten, because they're too deep for kindergarten. We'll link that video. We also discussed 1 year what happens when Moshe Rabbeinu leaves the palace for the first time. He goes out and he sees an ish hitting a different ish. This whole idea of an ish, of a man, what is this about? Because we find this concept of an ish, a man, throughout the entire Parsha, starting with Vayelech ish mi Beit Levi, and then Vayoel Moshe lashevet et ish. Moshe agrees to stay by Yitro, and then in the middle between, as I was saying, with the Tan and Aviram, with the arguments over there, with Moshe killing the ish Mitzri. What's behind this whole concept? Because there's some very deep ideas over there too. We'll link that video too. And like I mentioned in the beginning, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to share it around, like it, comment below, and if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. And Shkoyach Yitzi.
Shkoyach Tuvia. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, and in Hashem, we'll talk again next week.